He jumped in front of arrows to save the Apache woman, but every scar was worth it. Thomas had always been drawn to the vast, open spaces of the American West. There was something about the endless sky meeting the rugged, sun-baked land that made him feel alive. Every morning, he would wake before sunrise, the soft pink light spilling over the horizon, and ride his horse along the winding trails, listening to the whispers of the wind and the distant cries of wild birds. He had a restless spirit, one that could not be tamed by the routines of city life, and the desert called to him in a way that no town or village ever could. On this particular day, the sun was high, beating down with an intensity that made the desert shimmer like a mirage. Thomas had been traveling for hours, following a narrow path that cut through canyons and rocky outcrops. His horse, a strong bay named Shadow, moved steadily, sure-footed on the uneven ground. Thomas had learned to read the signs of the land, the subtle marks on rocks, the tracks left by animals, and the movement of the wind through the tall grasses. But even with all his experience, the desert was unpredictable, full of hidden dangers that demanded respect. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Thomas noticed something unusual in the distance. A small plume of dust rose near the edge of a rocky plateau, moving in a way that suggested more than just the wind. Curious, he slowed Shadow to a cautious walk, squinting against the sunlight to get a better look. At first, he thought it might be a group of traders or settlers, but as he drew closer, he realized it was something else entirely. A small group of people had gathered near what appeared to be a village, and there was movement and shouting. Something was wrong. Thomas's heart quickened. He had always tried to avoid unnecessary conflict, but there was something about the urgency in the air that made him pause. From his vantage point, he could see a young woman at the center of the commotion. She was striking, with dark hair braided neatly down her back and eyes that burned with a fierce determination. She moved with speed and precision, dodging and blocking the attacks of several men who seemed intent on harming her. The sight filled Thomas with a mixture of fear and awe. He had heard stories of the Apache people and their courage, but witnessing it firsthand was different. It was raw, intense, and impossible to ignore. He felt a tug at his chest, a sense of responsibility he couldn't explain. He had always believed in helping others when he could, but stepping into the middle of a dangerous situation was different from simply offering aid on a quiet trail. Thomas dismounted, tying Shadow to a nearby tree, and crept closer, staying low behind a cluster of rocks. From here, he could see that the attackers were lightly armed but organized, moving with a purpose that made them dangerous. The woman fought with everything she had, but it was clear that if she didn't receive help soon, she would be overpowered. Thomas's mind raced. He knew the desert could be unforgiving, and one wrong move could mean death, not just for him but for the woman he was watching. Yet, despite the risk, he couldn't turn away. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act. He took a deep breath, feeling the heat of the sun on his skin and the dryness of the air in his lungs. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Every step, every choice carried weight. He felt the gravity of what he was about to do, and yet there was a calm determination underneath the fear. As he prepared to move, he observed the attackers more closely. They were younger men, likely no older than he was, but there was a hardened edge to them, a dangerous mixture of arrogance and desperation. They circled the woman like predators, each waiting for the right moment to strike. Thomas could see the fear flicker in her eyes for the briefest second before she masked it with a steely resolve. She was not just fighting for herself. It was clear she was protecting something, or perhaps someone. Thomas didn't know her story, but he felt connected to her struggle in a way that surprised him. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scent of sage and dry earth. Thomas took this as a signal, a chance to close the distance without being noticed. He moved carefully, one step at a time, using the rocks and sparse vegetation as cover. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exertion alone, but from the tension of knowing that one misstep could lead to disaster. Every sound seemed amplified: the crunch of gravel underfoot, the call of a distant bird, even the faint hiss of the wind through the canyon walls. It all seemed to conspire in this delicate balance between danger and opportunity. Closer now, Thomas could see the determination in the woman's movements. She was quick, almost graceful, using the momentum of her attackers against them whenever possible. Yet, despite her skill, she was outnumbered. Thomas's mind raced with possibilities. Could he distract the attackers? Could he somehow get her to safety without putting himself directly in harm's way? But deep down, he knew the answer. Sometimes, there was no alternative but to risk everything. Summoning all his courage, Thomas stepped from his cover and called out, his voice loud and steady. "Hey, over here!" The shout startled the attackers, and for a moment their attention wavered. That brief distraction was all the woman needed to regain her footing and push back against one of her assailants. But Thomas knew it would not be enough. The situation was escalating too quickly, and he could see arrows being readied by those lurking further back. The danger was real, immediate, and deadly. Thomas didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the center of the conflict, placing himself between the woman and the attackers. The sun glinted off the edges of the rocks, and dust rose around him with every step. He could feel the heat radiating from the ground through his boots, and the thump of his heart echoing in his ears. This was no longer a choice, it was action. In that instant, Thomas became more than just an observer. He became a shield, a protector, and a witness to courage in its purest form. As he reached the woman, she looked up at him, eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of relief. There was no time for words. The attackers hesitated for a heartbeat, unsure of how to respond to this new factor. Thomas could see the fear in their eyes, matched by a cautious respect. The woman took advantage of the moment, moving behind him as best she could while he positioned himself to block the next wave of arrows. It was a dangerous gamble, but Thomas felt no regret. Every instinct, every ounce of strength he had, was focused on keeping her safe. In that moment, Thomas understood something profound. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was action in spite of it. He was terrified, yes, but he was also alive with purpose. The desert around him, once quiet and still, seemed to hum with energy, as if acknowledging the significance of what was happening. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a moment that would define both of their lives forever. Thomas could feel his muscles tense as the arrows whizzed past him, some embedding themselves in the dry earth around him. Each one that landed near his feet sent clouds of dust rising, mixing with the heat of the desert air. He could hear the sharp whoosh of the arrows and the faint groans of the men behind him as they tried to aim more carefully. The woman, Alawa, stayed just behind him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Even though he had never met her before, Thomas felt a responsibility stronger than anything he had ever experienced. He could not let anything happen to her. The attackers were growing frustrated. Their careful formations were disrupted by Thomas's sudden interference. They had not expected someone from the outside to intervene, and their hesitation gave Thomas just enough time to act. He shouted at the closest assailant, "Back off. Leave her alone." His voice echoed across the canyon, strong and unwavering, even as his heart pounded wildly. The men exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to attack him directly or continue their assault on the woman. Thomas knew he had to act fast. He spotted a narrow gap between two rocks and grabbed Alawa's hand, pulling her toward it. She resisted at first, uncertain, but the urgency in his grip and the glance in his eyes convinced her to follow. Together, they ducked behind the rocks, crouching low to avoid the next wave of arrows. Thomas could feel the heat radiating off the sun-baked stones and the sting of dirt and grit as it blew across his face. He barely had a moment to breathe before the attackers regrouped, their shouts carrying across the plateau. He realized that words alone would not keep them safe. Thomas scanned the area quickly, looking for anything that could help. There were a few fallen branches and some stones lying near the edge of the plateau. In a desperate move, he grabbed a handful of stones and began hurling them at the attackers. It was not to hurt them seriously, but to distract and slow them down. The attackers cursed under their breath, some of them ducking or stepping back. Every second Thomas bought gave Alawa a chance to regain her balance and move further away from danger. Despite the chaos, Thomas noticed something about Alawa that amazed him. Even in the face of fear, she never froze. Her eyes scanned the area, her body moved with purpose, and she whispered instructions in a language Thomas did not understand, guiding him towards safer positions. It was clear she was skilled in the ways of survival, quick thinking, and determined to fight for her life. Thomas felt a growing admiration for her courage. He realized that she was not helpless, she was fighting her own battle, and he was merely giving her a shield. The attackers, now more cautious, began to advance slowly, their arrows poised. Thomas could feel his arms aching from holding them up as barriers, his legs trembling with the effort of crouching and moving quickly over uneven ground. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the fear of failing. Every arrow that flew past reminded him of the risk, yet also fueled his determination. He had made a choice, and he would not abandon it, no matter how dangerous it became. In a sudden, tense moment, one of the attackers got too close. Thomas stepped forward without thinking, placing himself directly in the path of an arrow. It pierced through the sleeve of his shirt, grazing his shoulder. A jolt of pain ran through him, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Another arrow narrowly missed him, embedding itself in the rock beside his foot. His vision blurred with sweat and dust, but he stayed focused. The desert was silent except for the sounds of their struggle, the clatter of rocks, the whispers of wind, and the sharp cries of the men. Alawa seized the moment. With Thomas shielding her, she managed to push past one of the attackers, using a quick, agile movement that sent him stumbling backward. Thomas watched as she ran toward a small canyon opening, her feet kicking up clouds of sand. He could see the determination in her stride, and he knew he had bought her precious time. But he also knew the danger was far from over. The attackers would not give up so easily, and every step he took toward them put him directly in harm's way. Thomas made a decision. He would stand his ground and draw their attention fully toward him, giving Alawa the best chance to escape. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, raising his arms to make himself appear larger, and shouted again, "Over here." "Aim at me, not her." The attackers hesitated, then, driven by anger and frustration, began to focus on him. Thomas felt a strange mix of fear and calm resolve. He was terrified, yes, but he also felt an inner strength he had never known before. Each arrow that flew at him, he deflected or dodged, using his body and quick reflexes to survive. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on as the sun beat down relentlessly. Thomas could feel the stinging heat of sweat on his face, and his muscles ached from the constant tension. Yet, he did not falter. The thought of Alawa escaping, of her life being spared, pushed him forward. Every movement, every calculated risk, became a testament to his courage. He was no longer just a traveler, he was a protector, a man who had chosen to put another's life above his own. Suddenly, one of the attackers fired an arrow that struck Thomas in the arm. The pain was sharp, but he refused to let it slow him. Gritting his teeth, he adjusted his stance and used his other arm to block further attacks. Another arrow grazed his side, tearing through his shirt and leaving a burning line on his skin. He felt the heat of the wound and the sharp sting, but he could not allow himself to collapse. Alawa was still running toward safety, and he could hear her faint cries of determination urging him on. As the struggle continued, Thomas realized something important. Courage was not just about physical strength. It was about heart, about the willingness to face fear for the sake of someone else. He could feel the fear in his chest, but it was matched by a stronger sense of purpose. Every arrow that struck him, every ache and pain became a symbol of his resolve. He would not let these attackers win. He would not let them take Alawa's life. The attackers began to grow tired, their movements less precise, their frustration evident. Thomas could sense it. The desert, silent except for their movements, seemed to encourage him, as if acknowledging his bravery. He could see Alawa gaining distance, her figure becoming smaller as she ran toward a safer area. The thought of her survival, of her spirit remaining unbroken, filled Thomas with renewed strength. Each step he took, each breath he drew, was fueled by the hope that she would escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alawa reached the cover of a small grove of trees, hidden from the attacker's view. She paused, catching her breath, her eyes scanning the area for Thomas. In that brief moment, Thomas allowed himself a small smile, knowing that she was safe, at least for now. But he could not relax. The attackers still lingered, angry and confused, their arrows still flying in his direction. He braced himself, ready to face whatever came next, determined to protect the woman he had vowed to shield. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the desert, Thomas understood the magnitude of what had just happened. He had risked his life, faced unbearable pain, and stood firm in the face of overwhelming danger. And yet, despite every wound, every scar he would later carry, he knew it had been worth it. He had protected a life, defended courage, and forged a bond that would forever change both their destinies. After the immediate danger had passed, Thomas sank to the ground, his body trembling from exhaustion, pain, and relief all at once. Every inch of him ached. The arrows that had grazed his skin burned like fire, and even the small cuts and bruises left by flying rocks stung sharply. He sat for a long moment, taking in deep, shaky breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. The desert around him was quiet now, almost eerily so, as if the wind itself had paused to watch what had just happened. He could see Alawa in the distance, her figure small but unmistakable as she moved toward the safety of a rocky ravine. His chest tightened with a mix of pride and worry. She was alive and he had survived, but the journey was far from over. Thomas knew that staying in the open desert, injured and exhausted, was dangerous. Even if the attackers had been temporarily repelled, they could return at any moment, and the thought of facing them again while weakened sent a shiver down his spine. Carefully, he pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the burning in his side and the stiffness in his arms. Each movement reminded him of the injuries he had sustained, but he focused on the goal: find Alawa and ensure she was safe. The thought of leaving her alone after everything that had happened was unbearable. As he limped toward the ravine where he had seen Alawa disappear, Thomas reflected on the events of the day. He had acted on instinct, throwing himself into danger without a second thought, and yet he felt no regret. Something deep inside him had recognized her courage, her determination to survive, and it had sparked a desire to protect her. He realized that bravery was contagious. Witnessing her fight, seeing her refusal to give up, had fueled his own strength in ways he could not have imagined. He had not just saved her life. He had shared in her fight, in her struggle to survive. Reaching the ravine, Thomas spotted Alawa crouched behind a large boulder, catching her breath and surveying the area. She looked up and saw him approaching, a mixture of surprise and relief crossing her face. For a moment, they simply regarded each other in silence. No words were needed. The unspoken understanding was clear. They had both risked everything, and they had survived. Slowly, Thomas lowered himself beside her, careful not to jostle the wounds on his arms and side. He could feel the adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. Alawa studied him closely. Her eyes softened, but there was also a hint of concern. "You are hurt," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced danger many times before. Thomas nodded, feeling the sharp sting in his shoulder and sighed. He tried to brush it off, but the pain was undeniable. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a weak smile. "It was worth it. You're safe." Alawa's gaze lingered on him as if she could see through his words to the truth behind them. She nodded slowly, acknowledging both his bravery and the cost it had exacted. The two of them stayed hidden in the ravine for hours, the desert sun gradually sinking toward the horizon. Thomas did his best to tend to his wounds with what little he had, ripping strips from his shirt to wrap around cuts and pressing his hands to staunch bleeding. Alawa assisted where she could, using water from a small leather pouch she carried and guiding him to clean away dirt and debris. In these quiet moments, Thomas had the first real chance to observe her. She moved with a natural grace, her hands steady and precise, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for danger. Even in exhaustion, she radiated strength and resilience. As night fell, the temperature in the desert dropped sharply, and the cool air brought a welcome relief from the heat of the day. They made a small camp behind the boulders, using rocks and sparse desert vegetation to create a modest shelter. Thomas wrapped himself in a blanket he carried, shivering slightly as his body protested the day's strain. Alawa sat beside him, tending to a small fire with meticulous care. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, illuminating the deep lines of fatigue and determination etched into both of them. Despite the danger and exhaustion, there was a shared sense of accomplishment. They had survived together, and that bond was growing stronger with every passing hour. During the night, Thomas and Alawa exchanged stories of their lives, each discovering the humanity and history behind the other. Thomas spoke of his travels, his fascination with the desert, and the moments that had shaped him into the man he had become. He described the beauty of the open skies, the quiet majesty of the mountains, and the sense of freedom that came with living on the trail. Alawa listened attentively, occasionally offering insights into the land he loved so dearly, sharing her own experiences growing up in the desert, learning the ways of her people, and surviving the harsh realities of her world. Thomas learned that Alawa had faced dangers far beyond what he had imagined. She had grown up in a time and place where survival required constant vigilance, skill, and courage. She had learned to track animals, read the movements of other tribes, and defend herself from threats. Her people had taught her the value of courage, resilience, and resourcefulness. As she spoke, Thomas realized that her bravery was not a single act. It was a lifetime of preparation, experience, and inner strength. Her ability to survive the attack earlier that day was a testament to the lessons she had learned long before he had ever met her. In turn, Alawa learned about Thomas's perspective on courage. He spoke of moments when he had faced fear, when he had acted in ways that seemed reckless but were guided by instinct and compassion. He admitted his doubts, his moments of hesitation, and the pain he had felt during the fight. She listened quietly, respecting his honesty and the vulnerability he shared. For the first time, Thomas felt that someone truly understood the sacrifices he had made, not just in that moment, but in the choices that had brought him to this point in his life. The night stretched on and the stars emerged, filling the sky with a dazzling array of light. The desert, vast and silent, seemed to watch over them, a quiet witness to their shared experience. Thomas felt a sense of peace he had not known before. Despite the scars he had already earned and the pain that lingered in his body, he knew he had done the right thing. Protecting Alawa had not just been an act of bravery, it had been a moment of connection, a merging of two lives through courage, trust, and shared humanity. By morning, Thomas felt a renewed determination. The injuries still throbbed, and the memory of arrows narrowly missing him haunted his thoughts, but he was ready to face the challenges ahead. He and Alawa would need to travel together, find safe shelter, and ensure they were not followed by the attackers. The day would be long, and the journey would be difficult, but Thomas felt a sense of purpose that outweighed the fear. Each scar, each wound, was a reminder of the life he had saved and the courage he had discovered within himself. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the desert, Thomas and Alawa prepared to move. The bond they had formed in the quiet hours of the night was unspoken but profound. There was trust, respect, and an understanding that they would face whatever came next together. Thomas knew that his journey had changed forever, not just because of the dangers he had faced, but because of the connection he had made with someone whose bravery matched his own. Together, they set out across the desert, careful and deliberate, each step measured and cautious. Thomas kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, while Alawa moved with the natural ease of someone intimately familiar with the land. They shared small smiles, brief moments of levity, and quiet words of encouragement, building a rhythm of trust and companionship. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but the shared goal of survival, safety, and understanding made the vastness feel less intimidating. Thomas knew that the journey ahead would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. There would be more dangers, more challenges, and moments that would demand courage and resilience. But he also knew that every scar he had earned, every moment of fear he had faced, had prepared him for this. He was no longer just a traveler wandering the desert. He was a protector, a companion, and someone who had discovered the true meaning of courage. As the days passed, Thomas and Alawa traveled cautiously through the desert, moving from one hidden spot to another, always aware of the potential dangers that lurked in the vast landscape. Every step demanded careful attention, every sound, a possible warning. Thomas's body still ached from the injuries he had sustained, and each scar throbbed as a reminder of the battle he had faced to protect Alawa. Yet, despite the pain, he felt stronger in spirit than ever. He had survived, he had protected someone he had only just met, and he had gained a bond that went beyond words. Alawa moved beside him with a quiet strength that Thomas admired. She was alert, observant, and precise in her actions. She taught him to notice subtle signs in the desert, the small disturbances in the sand that indicated animal movement, the shadow patterns that suggested someone or something was approaching, the faint smells carried by the wind that told stories about the land. Every lesson she shared made Thomas feel more capable, more connected to the land, and more appreciative of the skills she had honed over a lifetime. One afternoon, as the sun beat relentlessly overhead, they arrived at a small, hidden canyon. Alawa paused, scanning the area carefully before allowing them to rest. The canyon was narrow, with high walls that provided shelter from the wind and potential attackers. Thomas dropped to the ground, grateful for a chance to catch his breath and tend to his wounds. Alawa knelt beside him, using water from her leather pouch to clean and bandage his cuts. Her hands were gentle yet confident, each movement precise, and Thomas felt a quiet gratitude. He realized that he had been fortunate not only to survive the attack, but also to be helped by someone so skilled and kind. As they rested, Thomas reflected on how much he had learned from Alawa in such a short time. He had entered the desert as a traveler seeking adventure, but he was leaving it with a deeper understanding of courage, resilience, and trust. He could see that her bravery was not only in facing danger, but in the quiet strength she carried in her every action. She was a living testament to the lessons of survival, and he felt honored to witness them firsthand. That evening, as the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, Alawa shared stories of her life and her people. She spoke of the traditions passed down through generations, of the close-knit bonds within her community, and of the struggles they faced in protecting their land and families. Thomas listened intently, fascinated by the richness of her experiences and the wisdom she carried. He realized that her life had been shaped by challenges far greater than he had ever faced, yet she remained unbroken, resilient, and determined. Thomas began to share more of his own experiences as well. He spoke of his childhood, his travels, and the moments that had shaped his character. He described the sense of freedom he felt when riding through open landscapes, the quiet joys of observing nature, and the lessons he had learned about life, courage, and compassion. Alawa listened with patience and interest, offering her own thoughts and reflections. In these quiet moments, a bond grew between them, a connection forged not just through shared danger but through mutual respect and understanding. Over the next few weeks, they continued to move together, learning from one another and relying on each other's strengths. Thomas grew more confident in navigating the desert, applying Alawa's lessons with increasing skill. He learned to read the land in ways he never had before, to anticipate potential threats, and to act with both caution and decisiveness. In turn, Alawa seemed to appreciate his courage and determination, recognizing that he was willing to risk everything to protect her and others, even when the odds were against him. One morning, as they made their way along a rocky path, they encountered signs that someone had recently been in the area. Footprints in the sand, disturbed rocks, and the faint scent of smoke told them that others were nearby. Alawa's eyes narrowed and she gestured for Thomas to be quiet. They crouched low, moving carefully along the path, their senses alert to every sound and movement. The experience was tense, but it also reinforced their trust in one another. Thomas knew that he could rely on Alawa's instincts, just as she had come to trust his courage and willingness to face danger. During these moments of vigilance, Thomas had time to reflect on the scars he carried. Each one told a story: the arrow that had grazed his shoulder, the one that had struck his side, the countless small cuts and bruises that reminded him of the battle. He realized that these scars were more than marks of pain. They were symbols of courage, resilience, and the choices he had made to protect someone else. He felt a sense of pride, not in the danger itself, but in the actions he had taken, the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had learned. As they continued their journey, Thomas and Alawa began to find small moments of joy and lightness amid the challenges. They shared meals, laughed at small mishaps, and marveled at the beauty of the desert around them. The sunsets, the clear night skies filled with stars, and the quiet moments by the fire allowed them to connect in ways beyond words. Thomas realized that even in the harshest environments, there was room for hope, friendship, and the bonds that make life meaningful. One evening, as they rested near a small stream, Alawa spoke quietly about the importance of community and trust. She explained that courage was not just about facing danger alone, but about relying on others, sharing responsibility, and working together to overcome challenges. Thomas listened, understanding that their journey together had taught him this lesson in the most immediate and personal way. He had acted alone to protect her, but it was their cooperation, trust, and mutual understanding that had ensured their survival. Over time, their journey led them to a small settlement where Alawa's people lived. The community welcomed them cautiously, wary of outsiders but respectful of Alawa's judgment. Thomas's bravery and willingness to protect her earned him the trust of the villagers, and he began to understand the value of working with others, learning from them, and sharing experiences. The scars on his body became visible symbols of his courage, and the villagers treated him with a mixture of respect and admiration. Thomas and Alawa spent weeks with the community, helping where they could, sharing stories and learning from one another. Thomas found himself growing stronger, more capable, and more connected to the land and the people around him. Alawa, too, seemed to grow more comfortable with his presence, trusting him not just as a protector but as a companion and friend. Their bond deepened with every shared challenge, every lesson learned, and every moment of trust. Through all of this, Thomas realized that courage was not only about facing danger, it was about connection, understanding, and the willingness to act for the sake of others. Every scar he had earned, every risk he had taken, had brought him closer to understanding the true meaning of bravery. And as he looked at Alawa, seeing her strength, resilience, and unwavering determination, he knew that their journey together had changed both of their lives forever. By the time they prepared to leave the settlement, Thomas felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment he had never known before. The desert, once a place of isolation and challenge, had become a space of growth, learning, and human connection. The scars he carried were no longer just reminders of pain. They were proof of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that form in the face of adversity. He knew that the lessons he had learned with Alawa and the trust they had built would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas and Alawa continued their journey together, moving carefully through the desert and nearby mountains. The sun rose and set over endless stretches of sand, rocky outcrops, and rugged trails, each day presenting new challenges. Thomas's body still bore the marks of his injuries, scars across his arms, chest, and legs, but each one reminded him of the moment he had risked everything to protect Alawa. Those scars were no longer just reminders of pain. They had become symbols of courage, resilience, and the bond he had formed with someone who had changed his life forever. Together, they faced obstacles that tested both their physical abilities and their trust in one another. They navigated treacherous paths where a single misstep could send them tumbling down cliffs. They crossed shallow streams and rocky valleys, sometimes hiding during storms or waiting out moments when danger might return. Each challenge demanded careful planning, cooperation, and vigilance. Thomas grew stronger with every step, not just in body but in spirit. He had learned to anticipate the land, respect its dangers, and work alongside Alawa, who remained a guide, protector, and teacher all at once. Despite the hardships, Thomas and Alawa found moments of quiet reflection. They watched sunsets in silence, the sky painted with brilliant reds, oranges, and purples. The vast desert stretched endlessly around them, a place that seemed both harsh and beautiful, unforgiving yet alive with hidden life. Thomas would often pause to take it all in, feeling the warmth of Alawa's presence beside him, the strength of their partnership, and the quiet joy that came from surviving together. He realized that courage was not just in facing immediate danger, it was in every choice, every step, and every act of care for another person. Their journey eventually led them to a small village at the edge of a river, where Alawa had once lived with her family. The village was modest but welcoming, and the people eyed Thomas with curiosity and caution. He understood their wariness. He was an outsider, a stranger who had arrived in a place that prized safety and trust above all else. Yet, when Alawa introduced him and explained how he had risked his life to save her, the villagers' skepticism transformed into respect. They saw not just his bravery, but the selflessness and determination that had guided him. The scars on his body were proof of that courage, and they spoke more loudly than words ever could. Thomas was welcomed into the village with warmth and appreciation. He spent time helping the villagers with daily tasks, assisting with repairs, hunting small game, and learning the skills and customs that were unfamiliar to him. He listened carefully to their stories, laughed at their jokes, and gradually became part of the community. Alawa remained his guide, introducing him to the traditions and practices of her people, ensuring he respected their ways while also finding his own place among them. Over time, the bond between Thomas and Alawa deepened, rooted not just in shared danger but in friendship, trust, and mutual respect. One day, while helping rebuild a small structure damaged by a recent storm, Thomas reflected on how much his life had changed since he had first entered the desert. He had been a traveler seeking adventure, driven by curiosity and a restless spirit. But through the trials he had faced, the battles he had fought, and the people he had met, he had discovered a new sense of purpose. Courage, he realized, was not measured by the number of dangers one survived, but by the willingness to act for the sake of others, to protect those who could not protect themselves, and to grow from every experience. Alawa often joined him during these reflective moments. She shared stories of her ancestors, of people who had faced hardships with courage and wisdom, and of the lessons that had been passed down through generations. Thomas listened intently, realizing that her bravery was rooted not only in skill and instinct, but in the values and traditions she had learned from her community. He felt honored to be part of that story, to have contributed in a small way to the preservation of life, trust, and courage in the face of danger. As the weeks passed, Thomas's physical wounds slowly healed, though the scars remained as permanent reminders of the trials he had endured. Each scar told a story: the arrow that grazed his shoulder, the one that struck his side, the countless small cuts and bruises from rocks and thorns. He wore them with quiet pride, understanding that they were symbols of resilience, courage, and sacrifice. The villagers treated him with respect, not just for his bravery, but for the integrity and selflessness he had demonstrated. Thomas felt a deep sense of belonging, knowing that his actions had earned trust and forged lasting connections. During this time, Thomas and Alawa continued to build a strong partnership. They worked together to hunt, gather food, and assist the villagers with daily life. They shared moments of laughter, relief, and joy, realizing that courage was not only about facing danger but also about building connections, supporting one another, and finding strength in collaboration. The desert had taught Thomas many lessons, but perhaps the most important was that true bravery was inseparable from empathy, trust, and love for others. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Thomas and Alawa sat together on a small hill overlooking the village. The sky was painted with vibrant oranges and purples, and the river below shimmered in the fading light. Thomas looked at Alawa and smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I never imagined," he said quietly, "that I would find courage, friendship, and trust in the middle of the desert. And I never imagined I would meet someone like you." Alawa smiled in return, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "You acted with courage when it mattered most," she replied, "and every scar, every step was worth it. You have learned what it truly means to protect life and honor those who trust you." Thomas realized that Alawa was right. Every scar he carried, every risk he had taken, and every moment of fear he had faced had been meaningful. They had saved a life, built trust, and forged a connection that went beyond words. Courage was not only in fighting battles, but in the willingness to act with integrity, compassion, and determination. The desert had tested him, shaped him, and revealed the depth of his own strength. As time went on, Thomas and Alawa became known within the village not only for their courage, but for their cooperation, skill, and dedication to helping others. They assisted in training younger members of the community in survival skills, teaching them about vigilance, courage, and the importance of protecting one another. The lessons they shared were practical, rooted in real experience, and full of wisdom gained from facing danger together. Their partnership became a symbol of trust and bravery, showing that courage was strengthened when shared with others. One day, Thomas sat quietly by the river, tracing the scars on his arm with his fingers. Each mark carried memories of pain, fear, and determination, but also of triumph and compassion. He thought about the moment he had stepped in front of the arrows to protect Alawa, and he understood fully that every scar had been worth it. They were proof that courage could save lives, build trust, and create connections that endure. He smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and peace, knowing that his actions had made a difference. As the story of their journey spread within the village and surrounding areas, Thomas and Alawa were celebrated not for heroism alone, but for the way they had demonstrated bravery, compassion, and integrity. Their story became a lesson for others, that courage is not simply facing danger alone, but taking action to protect life, honor trust, and forge bonds that strengthen humanity. Every scar, every challenge, and every moment of fear had contributed to a legacy of bravery that would be remembered for years to come. By the time the desert sun had fully risen and the village was bustling with life, Thomas understood the full meaning of his journey. Courage was not about reckless risk. It was about purpose, empathy, and action. Every scar he carried was a reminder of the moment he had chosen to protect someone else, to trust in his instincts, and to face danger without hesitation. Every step he had taken alongside Alawa had taught him that bravery is strongest when it is shared, and that true courage can transform lives, both his own and those of others. As Thomas and Alawa prepared for a new day, standing side by side beneath the vast, endless sky, they knew that their journey together had changed them forever. They had faced fear, risked life and limb, and learned the meaning of courage, trust, and human connection. Every scar Thomas bore was a badge of honor, every lesson he had learned a testament to resilience, and every moment spent with Alawa a reminder that true bravery is inseparable from love, respect, and compassion. And as the desert stretched endlessly around them, alive with challenges and opportunities, they were ready to face whatever came next together.